Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Liberty Me Live. I'm your host, Matt Gilliland, and we're here today with Godfrey Bloom. Now, Mr. Bloom while he was in the European Parliament, he was probably the most famous member for the 10 years he spent there because videos of his controversial speeches about taxation, global warming, sexism, and government overreach have had more than 1 million hits on YouTube, which is far more than anyone else in the European Parliament. They're great clips of him stating that taxation is theft, that global warming is a scam, etc. Wonderfully controversial stuff. He's been attacked in newspapers, blogs, and talk shows, and sometimes they'd take his snippets of his speeches out of context and just repeat them over and over. But amidst this cloud of controversy, Mr. Bloom recently resigned from the UK Independence Party, and he's no longer an MEP, but he's devoted some of his time to writing books. And he's got 3 books out here. He's got a collection of his articles, Billy No Mates, or What He Really Said, his autobiography, Guinea a Minute, and then the book we're here to talk about today, A Dinosaur's Guide to Libertarianism. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Godfrey Bloom and let him tell you about that.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, all pretty accurate stuff. I retired from party politics in July to take up more full-time pure libertarianism work and the promotion of libertarianism. And my last book, A Dinosaur's Guide to Libertarianism, was promoted or prompted or inspired, if you will, by 2 things. Firstly, when I was campaigning in 2009, an ordinary working man in a car park who recognised me in an airport, Leeds Airport, an ordinary working man, and he came up to me and we chatted for a bit, and he said, "Why can't they leave us alone?" And I gather now that's quite a popular phrase in the United States for libertarianism. Why can't they leave us alone? But it encapsulated everything I'd really thought about. He was talking about not being able to have a cigarette with his pint in the pub. But of course there's a million different examples. And I thought, yes, I'm going to devote a book to not an academic book. There's lots of those, and better than mine, written by academics and done very well. And of course, Jeffrey Tucker and Pat Barron and members of the Mises Institute, and these people do it so well. But as a party politician, I thought it might be a good idea to do a sort of a memoir, a short book, a small book, saying, what is it like to be an elected politician? I was re-elected in 2009, if I may dare say, very popular with the public, but very, very unpopular with the establishment, which has ended up my own party. My own party, as it were, sort of abandoned me because they started out as a libertarian party, and now they've got the whiff of power. They're doing very well because we started with libertarianism. We started to be a party of ordinary people, and of course now it's been hijacked, if you will, taken over by people who seek office. And there was one other thing before I come on to Q&A. I gave a lecture at the Mises Institute last year in Alabama. Lovely people, thoroughly enjoyed it. A lot of young people, and they were suggesting that I shouldn't have involved myself as a pure libertarian with party politics at all. And I've covered this in my book because I do understand that as being a perfectly legitimate viewpoint. But as a libertarian, I've been able to reach far more people than I could possibly have dreamt of by going that particular route. And I know for a fact, just checking on the hits on websites and looking at radio and television audiences, I know that I have reached probably 10 to 20 million people without fail preaching, if you will, libertarianism, and that is something I could never have done in a lecture room or in laboratory conditions of the academic world. So did I do the right thing? Yes, I think I did. And of course, if Ron Paul hadn't been a politician, he wouldn't have been able to create so much interest in the cause. So I think we all need to fight for libertarianism on the front that we do best. But I think those of you who buy the book, it's available on Amazon, you'll see just how the establishment closes ranks and is so frightened. I'm not an important politician, I wasn't an important politician in the United Kingdom, but it's fascinating just how frightened the establishment was of me. And because they couldn't come to argument, because they couldn't come to legitimate debate, of course it turned to personal vilification. And the paradox is that the more they vilified me, the more ordinary people knew that it was the establishment ganging up on the little guy. So it didn't work. So libertarianism is popular amongst young people. I find it's more popular in North and South America than it is here, where we have, of course, been brought up to believe that the state, cradle-to-grave state welfare, and the state, the man in Whitehall, the man in government knows best. And young people have been brought up to deeply believe that. And it's a difficult path to fight against this sort of thinking, even from people who know better. But of course, I lecture at universities. There is only Keynesian economics taught. Only Keynesian economics taught in English universities, and I think that's probably true of most European universities. And I know indeed that it is almost totally true. There's only one academic in the state system, to my knowledge, teaching Austrian economics, and that's Professor Pat Barron. So it's very difficult to break into the state system. Quite obviously, they want to keep it closed. Keynesianism and politicians are different sides of the same coin. And it produces the system, as I've said in my book, it produces the system consistently of bread and circuses. You bribe people with their own money under the current welfare systems in the industrial democracies and the Anglosphere, and people go automatically and go and vote in their self-interest. So I do make reference to Hans Hopper's excellent book, The Death of Democracy, and again, he's got a point. But I think, and I've also made this point, I believe us all to be students of libertarianism, because I think it's a philosophy where you never actually master it. You are always a student of it. So as we come on to Q&A now, I can assure you that I don't have many answers. I probably have more questions than answers, and that's the point I've made in the book. So Matt, if you'd like to open it up to any questions.
All right, I'm afraid I must confess to having been one of the critics at your Mises Institute talk. I guess that was summer of 2012, I believe.
It was indeed.
I will say that I don't have any criticism for you being involved in the political system. I was actually on a debate panel a couple of years ago, shortly after that speech, and I was on the side that was saying that libertarians should use the political system, though I am an anarchist myself. And when it came my turn to speak, I just stood up and asked the crowd, all right, who here came to libertarianism or was significantly encouraged in libertarianism by either Ron Paul or the Libertarian Party? And 2/3 of the crowd raised their hands. And I was done. My job there was done. I had proven my point. So I do think that you may have done some valuable work. Hopefully some people were exposed to the message because of your work in the European Parliament. Now, in your new book, you write that A democratic system monopolized by political representation is doomed to failure on any number of counts. It is, by its very nature, exposed to intellectual corruption. And you go on to talk about the financial consequences of excessive government spending. And then you say, curtailment of public spending, therefore, or indeed any serious reform, cannot be brought about by democratic means. Bankruptcy or revolution are the only options. Now, can you talk about the book a little bit and what brought you to that startling conclusion?
Well, I believe that under the current democratic system that we have, that it could only end in two ways, and of course that is a complete collapse of the system in some format. There is no other alternative. But if we look at the democratic system that we have, it isn't quite like the democratic system that we had maybe 100 years ago or 150 years ago. And in an appendix in the book, I refer to the Reform Acts of the 1830s in England, where up until that point largely democracy had been corrupted because only the interests of the landowning aristocracy were taken into account. The Reform Acts of the 1830s in the United Kingdom actually enfranchised the middle classes, the people who were creating the wealth in the Industrial Revolution. And of course the United Kingdom had the biggest and fastest industrial revolution at that time of any other country, and created the biggest empire, in point of fact, the world has ever seen, based on trade. It was a trade empire. It wasn't a military empire, it was a trade empire. And so I would argue that if you have a democratic system which limits its franchise to people who actually contribute to the system, there is some possibility of hope. So, for example, if you go with your college chums, if you go into a bar and you all put $25 into the kitty, you will get a beer. I don't think it's appropriate, if you don't put your $25 into the kitty, that you get a beer. And we have a society today that people are really concerned about what they can get out of the system. So they don't put in their $25 and they don't ask for a beer, they ask for a large bourbon on the rocks. And this is, they're only interested in what they can get out. And so consequently you get people voting in self-interest. Because we've swung from the 1830s far too far now in the United Kingdom, and indeed the same in the United States and any Western European countries. You get a vote if you're 18 years old. Your sole criteria is that you live in the country. You live in the country and you're 18. You couldn't imagine a more suicidal system of running a country, could you? Absolutely ridiculous. Of course, in the English Civil War, the Second English Civil War, Oliver Cromwell suggested, as a parliamentarian, that it wasn't enough just to breathe the air in order to give yourself a vote or enfranchisement. You had to contribute. So there is a slight caveat in my rather doomsday scenario. There is a slight caveat, but I think if we went back to a system, a form of democracy which actually enfranchised those who contribute, and I would argue, and I go into hot water about this, that I would argue that you shouldn't actually have people in the public sector voting, because they vote in self-interest automatically for more government spending, better government pensions, higher government salaries, and more government. So I think you should, if you want to come into public service, I think it's only right and proper that you do not vote because you have too much of an interest. Also, I don't want to upset any youngsters in taking part of this, but if you haven't ever contributed anything into society, I'm not even going to show that you should have any input on how the government spends your money. And I think, therefore, you would get a much fairer system, which, of course, you over there in America started, no representation without taxation. I think that's absolutely fair. And I think if we went back to that principle, it's not impossible that we could find a way forward for some form of democratic system. But this one that we have at the moment clearly is doomed to failure.
Now, what do you think is the best that we can hope for? You talk about politics in your book as the art of the possible. And given the state of our regulated, controlled, massively overspent governments, what's possible for us, and what can we hope for?
Well, this is where I come back to the question of limited government. And when we last saw each other down there in Alabama, I had a great deal of sympathy with the point of view that was being put to me in quite a forceful way. Because I suppose I should be able to come up with a wonderful formula of limited government. Now, of course, your first port of call is the law. Now, in the United Kingdom, we have a wonderful system of law, or we had a wonderful system of law, which was built on some fundamental principles, which evolved over 1,000 years. So we had under Magna Carta something, of course, that my own Prime Minister doesn't understand, doesn't know about, as he made clear on American television, a man of appalling ignorance for an British Prime Minister. Dreadful, dreadful man. So much for an Oxford and Eton education. I don't know what he was doing at Eton and Oxford. I suspect he was smoking dope most of the time. Up to him, of course, a libertarian, anything he wants to do. But we have this situation where limited government is a desperately difficult goal, but with our legal system of trial by jury, a presumption of innocence, the concept of habeas corpus, Magna Carta as a start, the Tolerance Acts of the 1600s, all of these things, of course, the United States adopted. You put them into a formal constitution. We have them in a Bill of Rights of 1688. Almost none of our own politicians over here know that we already have a Bill of Rights, a very good Bill of Rights. And I think the United States has a perfectly adequate constitution. And I know it's very controversial over there because I've got so many friends in America who argue that the constitutionalist position isn't adequate. But what I would say, maybe not an argument with them, but an argument that people say that it's become an anachronism, I would say that the men who put that together, that constitution together, understood only too well mankind and mankind's frailties, and they tried to put those caveats into the Bill of into the American Constitution to stop the sort of abuses we get now. Now, in the United Kingdom, and I referred to this in the book, we have something called an Enabling Act. So what happens, you pass an Enabling Act, you give it to a government agency, we call them quangos over here, quasi-autonomous government organisations. You then stack them with your friends at very high salaries, they report to no man, they operate totally outside the rule of law. And these people then have control that the East German police, the Stasi, could have only dreamt about, and they are unassailable. So the system that we had 150 years ago, our system of law and our system of democracy, where the enfranchised were those who contributed to society, wasn't bad. And it was, by today's standards, 150 years ago, in your country of mine, it was very, very much more libertarian than anybody could even imagine today.
Now, so in thinking of politics as a increases in liberty, has it been futile for you in terms of policy? What's been the most fulfilling or frustrating thing about your political career?
Well, I always like to be positive, so I'd only talk about the most fulfilling things. The first thing is the people I've met all over the world who are libertarian of a sort, not necessarily anarcho like yourself, but certainly well to the libertarian side. I've met an awful lot of people from all over the world like that, extremely intelligent, articulate people, capable of original thought. So that's been encouraging to know that I'm not alone, because I'm new to politics. I came into politics 10 years ago. I'm an economist by profession. Politics was new to me, and as I've explained in my book, it's a disgusting profession. The people in politics are frankly disgusting, with absolutely no moral compass whatsoever. And I come from the City of London, where I thought I saw some wheeler dealing, that these people are quite dreadful. The standard of political journalism in the United Kingdom is abysmal. Abysmal. So these charlatans and politicians are never asked any form of penetrating question. If you'll excuse me for saying this, it's a bit vulgar, but they all piss in each other's pockets. And this is one of the problems, of course, that we have. But the good news is that wherever I go, people come up to me and shake hands, and don't forget, I'm not a government politician. I'm a very backbench, very junior politician in the United Kingdom, and yet I'm recognised in the most amazing places all the time. In 10 years, not one single person has come up to vilify me or say bad things, unless I work for the press. Ordinary people, in the pub, in the clubs, at the rugby club, at the cricket club, are all very well disposed. So the positive thing I take away from this, Matt, is that there is a real hunger for libertarianism of a sort, of a form, and at least I know now that is the case, and that will be true, and there is possible for our intellectual argument to win the day. I know the fight is winnable, but I know probably not in my lifetime.
Now, you've been called a lot of names over the course of your political career, and dinosaur is just one of them. Why have you been so hated and so targeted?
Well, of course, I challenge the established thought, so I challenge feminism, but I challenge it from an intellectual perspective that they're not used to. I challenge all the so-called received political wisdom. I challenge welfarism. I think welfarism is the most poisonous and destructive thing that we've ever visited on our country. And I represent a great country. The United Kingdom is a great country. And it's slowly being poisoned. And you don't need to be particularly bright to understand that. If you want to really destroy a young fellow or young woman, a perfectly fit, healthy young man or woman, you pay them to do nothing except watch daytime TV. You could not invent a better way of destroying their morale and destroying their intellectual capacity than doing that. And we do that with 30% of our young people in this country, and it's up to 50% sometimes in the north of England, and the Mediterranean basin is the same, 50% youth unemployment. Society is unsustainable with that number of unemployment. But of course, if you start pointing these things out, if you point out these terrible truths, if you point out to the fact that our national debt is going up by hundreds of billions of pounds a year, that we now have a bigger national debt than the United Kingdom than at any time in our history, yet we've had 70 years of peace. If you start talking about these truths, these obvious truths, you have to be silenced, and they can't silence you in arguments, so they silence you with vilification. And there's a chapter devoted to this in the book, how they do it line by line, and I've given transcripts of interviews, and I'll give you a short example here, which you'll be very familiar with, on the legalization of drugs, for example. So I say, isn't it a woman's own business if they want to take drugs? And if it isn't the business of the state. And when the state enforces prohibition, all that happens, it shoots the price up. And we now have parts of my constituency where drugs are cheaper than cigarettes. The vilification and the dramatic vilification of cigarettes and tobacco. But if you look across the classes, if you look across the subclasses, middle class and upper middle class children don't smoke. it's working class children who smoke in the main. That proves that this is about education and peer group pressure. So the way to deal with drugs is education and peer group pressure, not prohibition. And if you make a sound argument, whether you believe in that or not, it isn't a specialist subject of mine, the response you get from your interviewer on state-run TV, the BBC, is run by the state, it's run by the intellectual left. The question they will say, they won't talk about the prohibition of drugs and its success or lack of success. Their immediate question will be, Mr. Bloom, do you have children? You see where they're coming from. Do you have children? Let's turn this man into a monster. This man is a monster who doesn't care about children. Now, of course, it's completely irrelevant. Look at the minimum wage. Germany is the most successful economy, as you know, in Europe. It doesn't have a minimum wage. We have a minimum wage here of about £7.5, $10, 10, 11 US, whatever you like. And when I suggest that all this does is keep young people out of work, because people in the north of England can't afford to pay that, so they end up getting welfare. The question is, the immediate question from the interviewer is, would you work for $10 an hour? Well, that's the standard of debate. Would you work for it? Meaningless question. And incidentally, to any listeners out there, I have. I've worked for nothing. I started my own business in 1992 when I was over 40. I worked for nothing for an entire year to get a business started. $10 an hour would have sounded like luxury to me in 1992.
So what's next for you now that you're done with politics? I mean, the books are certainly a good start.
Well, I'm writing, we've got a sister organisation, which you've probably heard of to Liberty Me, over in the UK called Libertarian Alliance. I think our entire capital value is about $10, and we're doing our best to try and catch up with the help and the guidance of the institutes who are further ahead of us at the moment in the United States, Liberty Me obviously being one, the Mises Institute with its intellectual depth and academic breadth and wisdom, and coming together, and of course growing in South America. I spoke in Brazil last year, this year actually, to over 5,000 libertarians in Porto Alegre. So it is growing. So I'm going to do my best to be evangelistic. If I could be the St. Paul of libertarianism in the United Kingdom, I'd be a happy man.
So how do we open up the conversation in an enjoyable and productive way in the public sphere with the way the media is? I mean, the media is so controlled and so bent on vilifying anyone who espouses free market views. How can we get the message out there and actually be heard?
Well, I certainly do lots of speaking still at universities and schools, but what we need to do, and I haven't got the answer to this, I'm afraid, but what we need to do is get journalists, if we could persuade journalists to say the question, is this the role of government? Only today, the government, a so-called conservative government in the United Kingdom, are saying that they're going to build 300,000 houses. Not a single journalist, not one, has said, is that the role of government? And when they're built on floodplains, as a lot of houses, new houses, they're built on floodplains, the government then being pressure on insurance companies to insure them against flood. Is that the role of government? If you eat too many hamburgers and chips, you get too fat. Well, yeah, we know that, but is that the role of government to tell us at vast expense on commercial radio and television saying don't eat too many chips, don't eat too many burgers, you'll get fat? Well, Yeah, but that's not the role of government, is it? So what we need is journalists to actually challenge this occasionally, and I'm afraid there are very, very few. There are very few mainstream journalists who actually try and challenge the status quo because they're part of it. And if you're a BBC journalist being paid for by the state, you're not going to knock the system, are you? And there aren't any strategists in government or journalism. People in this country politically are worried about what the Sunday newspapers will say. They don't worry what the papers might say next year or the year after. Nobody worries about our children picking up this debt or our grandchildren. So that's somebody else's problem. So we're going to have to increase the expertise, I think, of media, mainstream media journalism. How the devil we do that, well, I don't know.
Now, do you think that, as far as the national debt, do you think it's ever going to be paid back? Can we really pay it back, or should we repudiate?
Well, of course, it's unrepayable. And the other thing that I make in my lectures and my speeches and my books is that we're now dealing with numbers which are too great for the human mind to conceive. You know, what is a trillion? What is $1 trillion? You know, what's £1 trillion? What's 14 trillion, which is the supposed national debt of the United States? 14 trillion. It's like different galaxies, you know, in astronomy. You look at, it's something that our minds can't conceive. The average human mind can't. I know top academics in the economic sphere who can't conceive this. It's too big for the human mind. So our debt is too big to conceive. So yes, it has to be repudiated. How could it not be repudiated? Somebody come on and tell me how it could not be repudiated. So we need to get back to hard money. We've got to get away from fiat currencies, which always end in tears. You could go back to the demise of the Roman Empire, but there's lots of other historical examples that you can build. You can't just go on printing money. And if printing money worked, why doesn't the government give us all a little machine to put in our basement that prints money? Wouldn't that be wonderful for the economy? Oh, I'd like a new Bentley, I'd like a new Jaguar, I'd like a new Cadillac, I'll just nip downstairs to my printing machine. The whole concept of it is just too absurd. Only a politician and his cronies in the Keynesian central banking system could come up with this sort of nonsense. But of course, as you know as well as I do, Matt, and people who follow Liberty Me, the average Joe Sixpack, or the man on the Clapham omnibus, as we would call them, has no idea how he's governed. No idea how he's governed at all, and and even quite intelligent. I know lawyers who don't know how they're governed. I know politicians who don't know how we're governed. So people don't understand, and people don't understand the concept of money. They don't understand what money is, the definition of money. So there's a huge education system here. It's not taught in schools. Money isn't taught in schools. Nor the principles of law. Or the role of a central bank, indeed, should there be a central bank. And I speak at Oxford and Cambridge, Newcastle, some top, Warsaw. I speak at top universities, the ones I'm not banned from, incidentally, which is quite amusing. An old gentleman like myself, retired army officer as well, I'm banned from some universities because my ideas are so outrageous. So we need this massive education that needs to go on. It's very easy, isn't it, to steal something from people when they don't know they have it. I always make this analogy. You could come down to my house and go into my drawing room, and you could put all sorts of things in your pocket off the shelves and off the cabinets, because we haven't taken an inventory for 30 years. It would be years before we knew they'd been taken away. Well, if you take away liberty of contract, which is a fundamental principle of both our legal systems. If you take that and substitute that with regulation, if you take away trial by jury, habeas corpus, prima facie evidence, if you take these things away from people who don't know they had them, it's very easy. And if you look around on the train or the aeroplane or the bus or in the park, and you look at those people, mentally make a note of how many people you're looking at actually understand money or how they're governed or the principles of their legal system. I doubt you'll be talking 1 in 20,000. How easy is it for politicians to steal all this because they've dumbed down the population? Why do they want an iron grip on state education? It's so they can turn out morons who don't know anything, and then you can fleece them. You can take their money, and you can take their rights. You can take it all away from them they didn't know. That's the problem we have. So, of course, you have to get rid of state education. And then what they put on top of that is a curriculum. So the curriculum is put on by the government. So even if you pay for a private education system, all that you end up with is children who are educated in a bad system much better. They tick the boxes much more effectively, and they get to a better university, they get a better job. But they still don't actually know anything. And as I say, David Cameron's a classic example. There is no more expensive school in the world than Eton. Oxford is the second best university in the world. Of course, as we know, Cambridge is the first. So here we're dealing with somebody who supposedly has a wonderful education, but doesn't actually know anything. And it's embarrassing. He embarrasses me. He makes me somehow wish I was somebody else, like an Australian or Mexican or somebody.
So now that you've retired from UKIP, who are you going to support in the next UK elections?
That's a difficult question, because the trouble is with America and the United Kingdom, as for now for many, many years, probably for hundreds of years, you vote for the least disgusting party. So it's very difficult. I still think UKIP, although they've badly lost their way, and a lot of the people that run the party now are a little better than crooks, they're still rather less disgusting than other parties. And indeed, I use this in my own 2009 campaign when I was on the stump. I would say vote for Godfrey Bloom because he's slightly less disgusting than anybody else. And that's the sort of game we're in, isn't it? It's the same with you. Your choices are equally bad. How can a great country like America, with its great history and its great history of innovation and in invention, I mean, how can you have a president like you've got? He's almost as stupid as our prime minister. What kind of system throws that sort of moron up?
It's certainly a hard question. I was talking with I'm sure you know Walter Block. I was talking with him recently, and
Yes,
he was
indeed.
mentioning how his boy Obama was still better than the other options in 2008 and 2012. And so I posed the question to him. All right, if it's Hillary Clinton versus Chris Christie, who do you vote for? And he said, "Oh, you rotten child. That's just an easy question. How could you say that?" It really is hard, and these days I don't make it to the polls anymore because I'm more likely to be killed in a car wreck on the way than to influence anything. But I still think it's valuable as an educational tool. I'm going to put out a last call for questions here and let people know what's going on this week here at Liberty Me Live. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern, we've got Jake DeSillis, also from the UK. He's the host of the Voluntary Life podcast. He's got a book called Becoming an Entrepreneur. He's going to be talking about that book. Thursday, we've got two sessions. The first is with the one and only Butler Schaefer. He's going to be talking about institutions and how they thrive on creating conflict and then managing that conflict and keeping us in check. His talk is entitled Calculated Chaos, after the title of his, I believe, second book from 1985. And he is, and if you've never seen Butler Schaefer, definitely check that out. He's always entertaining and enlightening. And then at 9:30 Eastern, we've got Zach Slayback. He's going to be continuing his class that he's teaching on Love, Hate, and the State, an introduction to the moral psychology of politics. And next week, we've got some great stuff. We've got David Friedman, Dan D'Amico, and many more. So check us out at Liberty Me Live. All right, it looks like we have exhausted our questions here, but I want to thank you so much for joining us. I want to encourage everyone to check out Mr. Bloom's book, A Dinosaur's Guide to Libertarianism, which I will link here in just a moment in chat. And thanks so much for being with us. Thanks, everyone, for coming, and take care. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.